Yeah.
I just have experience myself.
Okay.
All right.
We are live. Welcome to our weekly basic income discussion group. I'm Alex Howlett. I host these things. And this week the topic is India. So we're talking about basic income in India and the possibility of it. We read an article. Some of us read an article by Arvind Subramanian entitled "Universal Basic Income in India is a Tantalisingly Close Prospect" from the Financial Times. So I want to start with a question, and the question is, what do we think about the idea, or what do we think about the effectiveness, the potential effectiveness of something like basic income in a developing economy like India's, as compared to, say, here in the United States or somewhere else?
I mean, I think the need is pretty obvious, pressing need, but the way it could be distributed is problematical, especially in rural areas, as the article pointed out. No ATMs, are there enough people online? Could they get PayPal? All that stuff. So, and they also talked about using biometrics as an ID, which I thought was interesting. Maybe because a lot of people in developing countries like India don't have, cards or credentials that would enable them to get through that system, whatever that system is. I mean, for me, the biggest takeaway I had from the article was that yes, it's so necessary, but the infrastructure to deliver it seems not to be. They're not really in place with that at all.
Yeah. Okay. Elizabeth?
So,
yeah, I mean, similar to what Joan said, when you say, how effective do we think it is? It feels obvious, effectiveness in terms of, yes, you can pull a, larger percentage or a larger number of people out of poverty in, quote-unquote, developing nations and, quote-unquote, developed nations. But in terms of effectiveness, how do you actually distribute that? I mean, I don't know enough about development economics to have a sense of the developing world as a whole, but my sense is that there's a lot of there's not necessarily a lot of banking, and I think the biometrics that India has done, I think, has historically been not super effective, where it's oh, sorry, we thought that you were dead, and so we just didn't send you your retirement payments, and so I was not super enthused by their oh yeah, we could do this thing. I was no, that sounds terrible. You need a really robust check system for that to be let's make sure we don't accidentally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know a ton about how infrastructure works in rural India, so I don't really have suggestions for how to make it more effective. I know there have been some European and US economists who have done mini UBI things in poorer countries, and I'm sure that some of them have ideas about best practices. But
Okay. Richard?
You can have a mobile payment system like they have in Afghanistan directly in Kenya, or you can have it give people debit cards and they can use the debit cards to buy things. That's the way you can make it work. And biometrics, you could always forge them or something like that, but I've heard that you can do veins in your wrist, and that's pretty much impossible to forge. So
really?
They take an image of it?
Yeah,
wow.
Scan it.
The patterns of things?
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow.
Huh.
I know that.
Interesting.
Fingerprints.
Yeah.
Because with fingerprints, you can do create how do I explain it? Sort of casts, but with
you can do mold. So
yeah, mold.
It's really easy to steal someone's fingerprints.
I see. Huh. That's interesting.
I would be similarly concerned about someone stealing my bank image. Because the closer, more personal it gets, the harder it is to like prove that like you're really the real you. I feel like, well, they have all this like biometric data and also all of your like secret password questions. Like, who the heck are you? And you're like, but I'm me. Like, that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
We could have a whole discussion about how to verify people's unique identities. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can even do eye,
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
or even doing contacts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Contacts. Right.
Steve, any thoughts?
I thought that UBI could help India in a number of ways. I understand that for poor people in India, there's no system of credit or banking or savings accounts. And that microcredit, it turns out, doesn't work as well as we thought it was when it was getting the Nobel Prize. It just sort of works, as well as one would expect. I understand that at least in sub-Saharan Africa, the banking systems for the poor are so non-existent that a few of the countries are just going to skip over the old technology, and they're going directly to smartphones, smart card, very cheap, easy to deploy systems.
Yeah.
Another advantage of UBI in India is that it, I presume the payments are going to be made regardless of caste, of ancient class.
Oh,
Well,
class.
they have like the caste system
Yeah.
in India.
Yeah. So, which I guess still exists partly. So it will be defeating that.
Yeah.
And I also understand that India has a lot of government corruption. And so if you can if the UBI can successfully minimize the need for low-level government officials in getting the money from the top to the bottom, that would be all good bet.
Yeah. Hey, David. So Mitchell says, maybe how would basic income work with non-stable interest rates is a question. So he's talking about the monetary system and the monetary policy in India, which is always, anytime we talk about a new place, the first thing I look up is, okay, how does their monetary system work? So he's kind of thinking along similar lines to how I'm thinking. But yeah, David, do you have any thoughts about the prospect of basic income in India and how it could work, or to what extent it could work in a developing economy?
So, sorry, I just walked into this.
Yeah.
But yes, actually. So, India, like everything else, I do have a thought on it, whether or not anybody agrees with me. Pleasure to see you again as well. But so, India has a very low cost of living, and a lot of people live for less than $1 a day.
Yeah.
So introducing like a very low level of basic income in India would significantly increase the quality of some people's lives. But because their economy is so large and some people are so rich, I actually think that India is an economy where a very low level of basic income would work really well. If you introduce $1 a day basic income to rural farmers and everyone else, it would double the quality of life for many people, but it wouldn't increase the cost of living for almost anyone. If the people who are rich in the cities or make more money in the cities, they'd have some money and they would do something else with it. They might buy another new phone or a new TV, but for rural farmers, a very low level UBI would actually double their quality of life.
So you think that India's economy has the capacity to produce twice as much stuff?
I actually do. I think India is a great example of an economy that could significantly, well, it wouldn't produce twice as much stuff, keep in mind. For half of the people in India, they would be able to consume twice as much, and there would be production of twice as much. But for the other half of people in India, there's a very sharp income divide. It wouldn't have a significant enough impact to really affect their quality of life or what they do.
I see.
So it would be like a 50% increase in the production capacity, or 40% or 30%. I mean, half of the people isn't half of the income.
Right.
And so I think, like, because of the low cost of living in many parts of India and the low quality standards and quality of life, unfortunately, it would be very significant for those people without generally negatively impacting the economy.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think a lot of the concern is kind of with fiscal constraints. When you talk about, or when people are talking about implementing something like this in a place like India, they're wondering, okay, what resources can we move from where? And I think David, you're probably right that it's not a matter of moving resources from one place to another so much as it is activating the resources they already have by giving people money to activate those resources. As I was saying, I looked up the Indian monetary system, and their central bank is the Reserve Bank of India, and they target inflation at 4%. Right now it's a little bit below 4%, but they try to keep it between 2 and 6%, and they've been pretty consistent. But as Mitchell pointed out, interest rates have been kind of moving a lot over the past few years. I think now they're in the interest rates on the government debt there is 6 to 7% or something like that. So a lot higher than it is here. So a question we might ask is, how much room is there for the Indian government to borrow more and spend more into the economy? Would they be okay raising interest rates? Does the Reserve Bank of India, are they comfortable buying up a lot of excess government debt to keep interest rates down? And then what does that do to inflation and all that kind of stuff? I think they have been doing some things that are inefficient with their kind of how they manage their monetary policy. Like sometimes they're depreciating the rupee against the dollar in order to improve exports. If you just don't do that and instead give people more money to buy stuff, then you can actually get more stuff coming into your country instead of kind of perpetuating this producing for the rest of the world pattern, and where you're making stuff and it's kind of going to everyone else. Now there's some questions of maybe a lot of the stuff they're producing is stuff that the Indian people don't even need. So like extra rice, I don't know what the main exports of India are though. Do you?
Textiles, cotton, steel is actually they have a large steel industry. The richest families in India make their industry out of steel. I can't think of any others off the top of my head.
Yeah.
It's agricultural products, the easy to make byproducts of agricultural products, and I know that they export some quantity of steel.
Yeah.
Well, they also export cashews.
Well, again, agricultural products.
And cashews are actually related to the poison ivy family, which is
yeah, but agricultural product,
right?
Because they have a lot of cheap land and subsistence farmers,
right?
Which are the people who make $1 a day, who would significantly, double the quality of life from an extra $1 a day.
So my intuition is that they're exporting all this stuff. So they have these resources that are going to making stuff for the international economy. If they were trying less to boost foreign demand for their domestic products by keeping the rupee low and that kind of thing, and instead stimulating domestic demand for the resources that they already have plentifully and available to them, that can create room for basic income. So you've got more of what they produce is available for the people, and you can use the basic income to actually purchase that stuff. So I think there's a lot of room there for basic income, and in terms of the level of basic income that the Indian economy can sustain, it's probably not as high as somewhere like here. But like you were saying, if people live on $1 a day, then a very small basic income can make a very big difference. Yeah.
They also have a IT economy and
They export a lot of IT services.
I see. Yeah.
I actually work with some contractors in India, and I have to take like 11 p.m. phone calls because it's their time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like these are people that would probably, if we had a more open economy, get jobs in the U.S. and be moved here by like a company would pay to have them come here
Right.
and pay them a U.S. salary. But because we don't, they're there, and we pay them less because the cost of living is less, and et cetera, et cetera.
But presumably within the Indian economy, these are the richer Indians, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like $20,000 a year in India is a lot of money, and outside of like a couple of major cities.
Right.
Um,
So a very low level basic income isn't probably going to have very much impact on them.
no, $1 a day would be a 5%
Right.
raise for them, or
Right. But a question is, if a lot of people in India have a lot more money to spend, then does that create an incentive for some of those resources, including maybe tech resources, to be competing for the business of Indian consumers rather than,
They do have a relatively internal, so they actually don't allow a lot of foreign competition into the Indian marketplaces.
really?
Yeah, they're a relatively closed economy to outside forces, but they will provide services and export things, etc. And like Amazon isn't allowed to sell Amazon branded products there anymore. They could either sell only Amazon branded products or have a marketplace for other sellers to sell products. But according to Indian law, they can't have both.
That's more of an antitrust thing, right?
Well, it's not exactly an antitrust thing. It's we will only let you in to do one thing.
I
Like
see.
it's
Interesting.
there are Indian companies that do both, but
Oh.
Amazon being a U.S. company, they wouldn't let them in to do both. Walmart has a relatively large presence there now, but they fought for years to have that presence, and they went through the court cycle over and over and over again to buy a domestic business in India because the Indian government was prohibiting the sale.
So all of this seems a little bit backwards. It sounds like they are trying to prevent other countries from selling them as much stuff, but maximize the extent to which they're selling other countries' stuff.
Yeah, that's how they view the idea of growing their economy. So, like,
Right.
I don't know how much you know about the backstory of India, but after their independence, they went kind of hard communist for a little while.
Okay.
And like there was a large presence of the Communist Party there, and they were very they wanted to close off the country. They had like government job guarantees, et cetera,
Right.
where it wasn't a guarantee, but it was many people worked for the government, quite frankly, in a very inefficient way, and they know that now, looking back at it. But there's still like that architecture that's there structurally that is like it's going to be generations until it is entirely gone. Like there's a story I have from a coworker that used to be a consultant and for textile manufacturers in the South, and when they moved to India, he went over there a few times, and the story was the textile manufacturer, they had these giant looms sew together the textiles, and then they had a guy at the end that would repair the textiles that came out of the loom rather than fix the loom, because that guy needed a job. So, but they could have hired somebody to fix the loom once, but this guy needed a job, so they just hired him to fix the textiles that came out of the loom. And he was doing that for years because
Yeah.
they just didn't fix the loom.
Wow.
Like, it's kind of structural there, unfortunately. Like, and I've had coworkers from India and et cetera who will tell me the same thing. There's just this like weird structural like codependency of like everybody needs a job, so just like organize the economy so that everyone has a job.
I mean, I would say that that's true here too. Maybe
Well,
not so explicitly, but
yeah, no,
but
it's definitely not so explicitly true here.
yeah,
But like, it's just like that's a job that doesn't need to exist at all, and it would
Right.
be a one-time $100 to have somebody come out and fix the loom, or pay this person only a few dollars a day, but a few dollars a day forever.
yeah. Huh.
And it's somebody's cousin or something, so you just keep the job. And the government works the same way. A lot of these industries are government subsidized to some degree. It's just
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what happens when you kind of expect jobs to be the way that people get their incomes.
Let me go off on that tangent,
Yeah.
the guaranteed job tangent. In America, I was reading some economist, and I was surprised that he took it as common knowledge that the defense budget should always be a constant percentage of GDP. And I thought the defense budget should depend on how much we need to defend ourselves from enemies.
No,
But
that's
this-
crazy.
This guy didn't even mention that in passing. And to the students such as myself, one might think that at least to this economist, job one for the defense budget is to maintain a constant percentage of employment.
Yep.
Well, and high technology research and all the other good things. And this was just an economically obvious statement.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with that. I mean, I think there's something to be said for maintaining defense infrastructure and continuing research and spending, even when you're not actively fighting a war. Don't actively need to defend yourself because that's important. But certainly, if suddenly our economy was able to produce 3 times as much stuff, we don't need 3 times as much defense. Yeah, or defense infrastructure. Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, by treaty, we have to spend so much on defense.
By treaty, we have to spend so much on defense.
Yeah, NATO requires 2% of your GDP to be spent on defense. I mean, we spend like 4% or 4 to 5. I don't know the exact number.
So that
now,
could be part of where it's coming from.
But
if we're spending twice as much as we have to,
yeah,
then
no. I mean, that's either. But some country, and this is some countries will spend less than. I think 3 or 4 NATO countries hit more than 2% consistently. It's the rest of them are the high ones. But like NATO treaty says, to be part of NATO, you have to spend 2%. It's basically you have to pay your fair share.
Right, that makes sense.
That's what the whole Trump meme of a few months ago was about.
Yeah. Well,
Not
that's
really.
neither here. That's neither here nor there. The point is that not every country does spend their 2%, and not to make it political.
I see. And Trump was complaining about it.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, he's not the first president to complain about it. He won't be the last. But
That's a fair point. Yeah, so I think, in a place like India, we talked about a $1 a day basic income making a huge difference, but I think even like a fraction of that, just even getting to the point where some token amount of income is going to every citizen, that can kind of
Opens the door to increases down the line when in a few years the whole phone industry where they receive people's complaints and whatever about their products will just go down the drain. That's what Andrew Yang said. Well, what's what I've been reading about.
Why would they go down the drain? The complaint?
so the tech support would be replaced by automated
okay.
tech support.
yeah, I mean, not 100% though.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: more jobs in this economy will become automated over time.
Yeah.
But maybe you don't need that first level of tech support, but you still need the second level for a while.
Mhm.
And then eventually maybe you don't need the second level, but you need the third level. And a
Yeah.
lot of these organizations are structured such that you have 4 or 5 levels
Yeah.
of tech support. And hitting that 5th level is lifetimes away.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of most of the impact on the labor force is going to be the first level, right? Because that's where most of them are.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like there's fewer people at the top of the
Yeah, yeah.
pyramid. So I think Richard has a valid point. But what I was saying before is that not only if you're able to get everyone a token amount of basic income, it opens the door, but it opens the door in a couple different ways. One of the ways is that once you've done that, now you have the infrastructure to provide everyone with a basic income. So that's a huge part of it, like what we started with, like where's that infrastructure? If you achieve even the small basic income, you've cleared that hurdle. You know what
But
I
I
mean?
think what we were talking about, how do you get even that first hurdle, over that first hurdle?
Right.
The infrastructure isn't there at all.
Well, the infrastructure actually is there.
We were talking about distributing the income.
Yeah, no,
You
the
know,
infrastructure is there.
So it's
In what? Well, to rural people who don't have access to ATMs and stuff.
Yeah, no, they absolutely have the infrastructure. They have a government ID that is biometrically locked to them
Right.
that
okay.
provides them with a specific, unique identification,
We're talking.
and people use at the post office and at banks and etc. And so like you can give they actually use that for the equivalent of food stamps over there currently.
right.
Okay.
So this is recent, and it's you can get the incomes to the individual people to their individual accounts. The tricky part, like you mentioned ATMs, and it talks about that in the article, is that sometimes even though people have money in their account, it can be tricky to actually access that money if you don't have, if you have to walk, a couple miles to get to the ATM or something like that. So actually allocating the basic income to people is probably a problem that's pretty much solved in India right now. It's just a matter of making sure it's convenient for people to access the money that they're entitled to. Like that's the problem they still have to.
Many people in India have smartphones, and the technology exists. It's very common in other parts of the world to transfer money electronically through a smartphone.
So it's getting very close, and these
Or a regular phone.
these problems are becoming less and less with each passing day. So I don't know that I don't know that this is going to be a big challenge standing in the way of basic
Accessing.
income.
Well, and
Yeah.
as Richard said, having debit cards and not having cash per se at all.
So debit cards are a little bit tricky because in order to use your debit card, you have to be spending it with someone who accepts debit cards, right?
Right.
So
Well, like yours. And merchants who have to accept.
right, but if you're just two farmers who want to make a transaction, like
Yeah.
How much would that go?
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
use the M-Pesa like in Kenya.
Yeah. So the more access they have to smartphones, and all of this is kind of coming together. So I think one of the points that the article makes is that India is kind of reaching a tipping point where people are going to have access to the equivalent of banking, even though Steve, you just read a book from maybe 2 years ago.
2011 actually.
2011. Okay, so
But the
the
M-Pesa was working at that time.
The what?
that's in Africa though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean the infrastructure exists, and if they
Yeah.
can be supported in Kenya, it can be supported in India.
Yeah, for sure. So getting everyone a token amount of basic income ensures that you've opened the door in terms of the infrastructure, but it also opens the door in terms of helping start to change the way people think about money and how they receive money. If it's normal for you to get a small amount of money, maybe it's not that weird for you to be getting a little bit more money, and then you can kind of go from there. And at the same time that the people are getting used to it, the monetary authorities and the policymakers can be looking at the effects of this and how people are responding or how the economy is responding, and start understanding that, oh, hey, there's a major benefit here, and maybe some of the other stuff we're doing to kind of support people through labor is maybe less efficient. Yeah.
And well, even if the election that the party doesn't get, that's proposing the basic income doesn't get in, the Sakim is going to implement one by 2022, and the business major who was said that who was here a number of months ago said that they're highly the provinces or whatever in India are highly competitive. So Sikkim, if they implement one, the nearby provinces will want to implement one as well. So
Yeah.
those just build on each other.
So that is cool. So Sikkim is a province like up in the northern part of India, I think on the border with Tibet, or maybe a little bit further east. But yeah, so if they implement, so they've promised, as Richard said, they've promised to implement a basic income system. it's a little bit trickier at the level of the province because you don't have the Reserve Bank of India to lean on if you want to deficit spend, that kind of thing. So they do have to like think more about their fiscal constraints.
They're going to use electrical dam money or whatever.
Okay.
They sell electricity to the nearby provinces.
So yeah, so that sounds similar to kind of like what Alaska is doing with their oil, that kind of thing. And that can be politically pretty difficult because you're kind of getting that money from selling that thing, and then you might have an argument over what's the best way to allocate that money. You can still, at the level of the province, decide you want to target the money towards specific people and still give out a universal basic income, but then kind of tax away the people you didn't want to target the benefit to, and then you keep the payout side simple and all the complexity is on the taxation side. So you can do stuff like that. I'm really interested to see how that plays out. So as Richard mentioned, the opposition Congress party, the Indian National Congress, has something. It's not a full basic income, but it's something similar to a basic income on their platform for farmers. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So India is actually part of the reason we're having this discussion now is that India is in the midst of their general election. So they may or may not elect a new majority party to Congress, and if they do, this new party has a plan that looks similar to basic income, or has some features of basic income for the poor rural farmers. Yeah.
The current party with Modi, he wants to increase the farms, not farm subsidies, but loan subsidies, and that just encourages people to take out loans, and it's because they're going to be written off. And so that just makes it so that banks don't want to loan people anything. So it's highly inefficient.
Yeah, so you end up in a situation where you loan people the money and then they end up keeping it anyway, or they end up not paying it back. And it's almost as if you gave them money, except a bunch of people all the banks got screwed, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, the banks are being subsidized. Whatever their losses are is incurred by the state. But yeah.
No, there you go.
Like they're not necessarily screwed. They're just,
It's a more complex, convoluted way of going about it.
Yeah, and it's actually not too dissimilar to something other countries do, including the U.S. in the past, where, we've basically said, here, banks, take a bunch of money, but go and make a bunch of risky loans with it.
Right. Yeah, and I think we do that. We do something like that with student loans. Like the government subsidizes that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not exactly risky there because you're not allowed to ever have them discharged in bankruptcy or anything.
Right.
Well, not never, but whether like 10
we'll
cases
see.
of it or something.
Also, that might change depending on politics and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it's unlikely to anytime too soon.
Yeah.
Not to crush anyone's hopes or dreams.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we could just make college free and then you wouldn't have to worry about loans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Harvard wouldn't be free still. I mean, it's a private institution.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make public institutions free, but then there's some complexity to it where, like, sorry, that's an entirely different subject. That's an entirely different subject.
You guys want to get into the article?
Yeah. Sure. I'm impressed you have like 8 quotes from an article that was like 8 paragraphs long.
Why don't I just read the article?
I mean, we could do that. I have a lot of it highlighted here. So this quote, the translation of ideas into actionable policy requires opportunity, which agrarian distress has created. For 2 years, prices received by farmers for most non-cereal crops have declined sharply, denting incomes and livelihoods. So this is an interesting point, and it's kind of related to kind of the automation scare that people talk about, where you're kind of highlighting an instance of the typical labor market not providing people with the incomes needed to fully participate in the economy. So you can kind of like politicians can kind of grab onto these things and use them as kind of a spark to talk about basic income.
What's it mean, prices received by farmers? Received by who?
Received by farmers.
So they sell their products.
So they
from
sell.
their
How much money do they get for the crops that they sell?
Okay, so it's what it costs.
Not necessarily. So the farmer could sell the product for $1. Let's say like
Right,
a barrel
right.
of hay is $1, and it could cost me $10 to buy.
Right.
And the next year, that farmer could receive 50 cents for it, but it could still cost me $10 because there's middlemen in between, and the middlemen might be squeezing the farmers and saying that guy's going to sell me his bale of hay for 53 cents. You got to do better than that. Otherwise, I'm not going to buy your hay.
So the cost might be the same.
The cost to consumer might be the same,
but
the
the
cost
price-
paid for
yeah,
the good
okay.
might go down.
Gotcha.
Right. So even if the farmers are buying other agricultural products from somewhere else, they might be paying the full price that they would have paid before, but they're not receiving as much for yeah. So I mean, this is the perfect opportunity for something like a basic income because people are going to pay you what they're going to pay you, but the economy still wants to sell you stuff, and now you can't afford it.
The real cause of that is automation. So if you can buy a tractor, it might cost you half as much to pull in the crop, so then you can sell it for less, but your neighbor might not have that same tractor,
Right.
so he might not be able to benefit in the same way.
So there might even be an argument for letting these farmers go out of business. And do we really need, if we have the technology to be more efficient and there's a farmer who has tractors and other forms of equipment, then why not sell the land to that other farmer and let the farmer without a tractor have money anyway, right?
Or like in the U.S., there's these tool programs where you can buy a membership to this tool library or bank or whatever you want to call it, and then everyone.
The problem with that is tractors tend to be used a few times a year. So having it be a bank where everybody's going to want to check it out on the same day.
Right.
That doesn't really work for farm equipment because people aren't going to say oh, you can have it this week to collect your crop and I'll take it next week. You might be able to do that with 2 people, but you can't do that with 20 people.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I wonder if there's equipment that can be repurposed for different crops at different harvest times or something like that.
Yeah, but the nature of it is such that you'd have to move between regions because regions tend to, at least in today's day and age, they try to specialize and maximize a specific product. And maybe, somebody else's harvest down the road is something different. But it's, again, you might be able to split it a couple of ways and people do stuff like that, but you're talking about half of the cost, not a 20th of the cost.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question to ask is, if you have this technology, if you have these tractors to produce food at scale, how many farmers do you really need? And maybe it's wasteful of people's time to even ask them to be farmers in the first place or to even support that. Yeah. Guys ready for another quote?
Okay.
So this is actually the next part. Politicians across India have felt compelled to act, not least since the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Probably not. Since that party suffered setbacks in 3 state elections in December last year. The losses were widely attributed to the government not having addressed farmers' concerns. So you have a situation where people aren't able to prosper from the professions that or the jobs that they're used to using to support themselves, and then there's political consequences to that. So is the answer to subsidize farmers and subsidize farming, or is it to subsidize people and subsidize peopling?
Well, I mean, it's similar here with the Rust Belt problem and automaker, all that stuff that went on. Everybody, well, not everybody, but Trump promised to bring the jobs back, coal miners and whatnot. So that's the usual approach. But it feels like they've gone beyond that now.
They've gone beyond that?
Yeah, gone beyond that thinking. At least one
Who's they?
party has in India.
Oh, in India.
In India, one party at least is thinking more about subsidizing people rather than trying to create jobs or subsidize jobs.
It's interesting because the Indian National Congress, the opposition party, they're not talking about a full universal basic income. They're talking about a guaranteed income for farmers.
Right.
So it's still kind of
Yeah,
tying
yeah,
them
right.
to this role
Yeah.
of being farmers
Yeah.
to some extent.
Farmers in India tend to be the lowest paid people.
Right.
I mean, agriculture is never super highly valued in most economies, even though everybody needs it.
Well, everybody
they-
needs food and everybody needs crops, but they don't necessarily need all those farmers doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they tend to be the people who make $1 a day in India.
Right.
Um,
So it's a convenient way to classify people and maybe a useful way to classify people, but then you're creating this incentive where you are subsidizing them kind of in their capacity as farmers.
Yeah, but the U.S. subsidizes farmers, people who would never actually farm the land, like celebrities who happen to own land that could be used for agricultural purposes, get paid thousands of dollars a year by the government.
Oh, really?
Like the Neverland Ranch.
Yeah,
Yeah?
Neverland
Really?
Ranch.
Is that right?
Yeah, he got like something like $30,000 or $40,000 a year to subsidize the Neverland Ranch.
There you go.
And
Well, I
the
guess
ag
he
department.
was growing important Neverlands there. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need these kinds of things. We don't need these kinds of support for various sectors and industries. Or let me put it another way. When we're looking at the economy and we're deciding whether to subsidize or support something, it makes more sense to do that in the interest of the consumer. So if there's something that's not being produced in the market or something that's not being accomplished in the economy that would benefit consumers, then you can step in and subsidize that. But if you're doing it for the workers, now you're supporting work that doesn't necessarily need to be done. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
But
So I think there's a role for subsidies, but it doesn't make sense to keep non-productive or inefficient businesses afloat for the sake of the people working in those businesses.
I mean,
Yeah.
if they replace it $1 a day, anybody who lost their business would be just as well off as they are today.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Maybe
is-
they wouldn't have to work as much.
Is
Yeah.
the thinking though to subsidize the people in the jobs or to keep that particular function going for when it comes back? I mean,
No.
It's not going to come.
well, I know,
Yeah.
but I think that there's thinking that way.
I
that,
think-
we'll keep it going because
I
at some
think the
point it
thinking
might
is
come
not
back.
that we'll keep it going. I think the thinking is that these people are farmers and that's their identity, and they're poor and that's their
You
identity.
think that's why they're subsidized?
Well, I think they're subsidizing them because they're poor, and identifying who's poor is saying, well, are you a rural farmer, right?
Yeah.
So it's a way of classifying people.
But I'm thinking
in order
about
to-
fluctuations, for example, in growth and output and so forth. And I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know when it was when people were dumping milk and dumping, products from the farms because they were they didn't need them. It was oversupply.
You're talking
but-
about government cheese.
Yeah,
I mean,
things like
sometimes
that.
they're forced to dump products.
Yeah, but I
Like
mean,
entirely
the
Yeah.
whole. It seemed like the whole role of government at that point was to keep the thing itself going, but keeping it so that it didn't go too much or too low. It's not about helping the workers. It's helping the actual function of the thing.
I think the whole government cheese thing was to support the
cheese.
dairy farmers. It wasn't to support dairy farming. It wasn't for the people consuming the dairy. No,
Dairy farmers
they
or dairy
offered-
farming?
dairy farmers. They offered to buy milk to keep the farmer, and then they ended up, having these caves full of cheese, and they didn't know what to do with the cheese,
Right.
and they just kept collecting more and more of it, and it was this huge crisis, right?
Right.
I'm sure you remember that.
Well, I got the cheese.
You got the cheese?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were hippies, we'd go get the cheese.
The government cheese?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. But I
It's
think
all cheddar, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
it was good, and peanut butter. But the economy
Peanut
itself,
butter's
I thought, had this. The
Jimmy
government
Carter.
had a role in stabilizing the industries, so they didn't want the industries to disappear, and
So-
it wasn't about caring about the workers' benefits so much.
It was to some degree. Like,
About the workers?
yeah, it was. So basically, the whole thing was most dairy farms are small family-owned dairy farms, even to this day.
Right.
Back then, it was more so, but the vast majority of them, and they maybe employed a couple of people. And the thing was, what would happen is, in a normal, healthy economy, you would have the prices would drop because there were too much dairy being produced for people who
Right.
didn't want it. Some people would go out of business, the prices would go up, and they'd be stable. But the government came in and they said, no, we want that industry there,
Right.
regardless of whether or not it's needed.
Yeah. That's basically what I'm.
But they
saying.
wanted it there for the people that were in the industry. It was like a dairy lobby that came in and said,
Oh.
you need to set a floor for us,
Okay.
and you need to help support this floor.
Right.
And they do the same thing with some agricultural products, not dairy.
Right.
I remember living in Wisconsin, every so many years, there would be a surplus of cranberries. Most cranberries in the U.S. are grown in Wisconsin, not Cape Cod, fun
Really?
fact. But I would have friends that would be on these cranberry marshes that would actually have to, like, a government person would come by and tell them, you have to dump that truckload of cranberries on the side of the road.
Right.
You can't sell it. You're not allowed to.
And they would pay them?
They'd give them some token amount of money that would actually make them angry. But it was because, like, in the U.S., they have made some deal where you can only have so many cranberries. There's a raisin cartel.
Oh yeah.
There's a raisin cartel. I don't know why, but like the government has mandated this cartel can't exist, and you have to obey the rules of this cartel if you are in the raisin industry. And they stockpile raisins some years, and they sell them off the other years, but they control anybody who sells raisins in the U.S. has to abide by the rules of this cartel.
I think it makes sense to some degree to manage fluctuations in crop yields and stuff like that, and have reserves of raisins or maple syrup or whatever and that kind of thing. But if the only reason you're doing it is to manage the supply for consumers and ensure there's a steady supply, then that's great. That's efficient. But as soon as you start doing it because you're trying to protect the workers in the industry, now you have dumping cranberries on the side of the road and caves full of government cheese that they don't know what to do with and that kind of thing.
So in a way, it has to do with lobbying and maybe unions as well.
Actually, very much not unions in
Not
that
unions?
instance. I mean, not for agricultural products as much. There are very
Well,
few agricultural.
The American Dairy Association.
Yeah, but that's not a union.
What
Okay.
about the beef people too?
Yeah, but,
I mean-
goodness, don't get me started on the
There's
beef.
I guess it's more lobbies than unions. Is how you
Yeah,
lobbies, yeah.
it's trade organizations and lobbies,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
unions. Like
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure that some dairy farm somewhere is unionized, but as
Yeah.
a general rule,
Yeah.
it's not a
Right.
union issue.
Right.
But
So
they're
it's less
for
of-
the workers.
It's
They're for
basically a business union.
right,
Right. So it's rather than a union of the individual workers, it's a union of
right.
the businesses.
For the businesses, yeah.
So that makes sense.
Same effect.
Cattle farmers.
Yeah. So I wonder what the politics are.
Ranchers.
How you doing there, David?
I'm sorry, it's just like
I wonder what the politics are in India. If there is even a farmer lobby, there's probably something like that. I mean, they're all poor, but
it's
that
half
doesn't
of the
mean that-
country is like rural people. More than half the
Yeah.
country is rural people, and many of them are engaged in farming. So they're a large constituency for
Right.
the parties, the elected parties, and so they very highly play them. It's like, if you live in Kansas, all your elected people are plain farmers.
Right.
But if you live in Massachusetts, in Western Mass, like they acknowledge, like everybody acknowledges it as a constituency. Even somebody based in Boston, there are a few small farms in Boston still, but like nobody plays to that base.
Right.
So it's just, I think that's really kind of the distinction where everybody has a large constituency of farmers in their district, so everybody knows they need to keep the farmers happy. They're also very poor, so a little bit of help goes a very long way for them.
Yeah.
So
in India, there actually is a union for women for like agricultural products and things like that. And there was a basic income like 7 years ago for the women in India.
How do you account for that?
So that was just
Well,
a short period of time that they did that?
For like 2 years.
2 years. Okay. Yeah, I think there's an idea, especially among like charities and NGOs and stuff, that if you're giving money to households, that the money is going to be more efficiently spent if you give it to the women. I don't know if it's related to that. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it's certainly been kind of the assumption and the standard practice for a while now. Just give it to the women. I think there's been some research more recently that shows that it actually, there are some differences between how the men spend money.
Men will spend it on like entrepreneurial things, while women will spend it on their children.
Yeah, so it's
men will spend it on alcohol. Let's be clear.
no. I think that was kind of the assumption.
Yeah, no, that is the assumption, especially in some places. Like in India, they recently had like very significant alcohol reform laws because they had so many drunk driving accidents.
I think what they've discovered recently is that maybe the difference in positive effect is not that great if you give it to the man or the woman. Yeah. So yeah, more entrepreneur, but then the women also spend it in good ways, and it's unclear which one is better. And it's of course statistical. Like there are some women who do one thing and some men who do the other thing, and that kind of thing. But yeah. So yeah, in thinking about, I was going to say something about the farming, just the identity as farmers. What do you guys think is the best path for having people not be locked in to be farmers? If you have a program that's targeting farmers, that seems like it seems smart because they're the people who need the help the most. But then now it's defining who they are as well, more so than before. Like, is locking that in.
So the traditional evolution of these things in most cultures and societies is to have farmers, and then when there's too much food and too many farmers, you have people move on into handicrafts, and and now this guy's a woodworker, and this guy's a metal worker, and this guy's a fletcher, and this guy's a thayer.
What's a fletcher?
Make arrows.
Ah.
So they that's the traditional course of things in human history.
Yeah.
And you've seen this has come and gone throughout different societies for many thousands of years. The problem in India right now is a lot of those kind of traditional next level steps no longer exist.
Right.
And their economy is not structured in such a way that it's practical for them to exist. Even in parts of Africa, what you'll see is you'll still see people do some of those middle level, next step up from farmer arts, because okay, well, I need a new stick shift for my car, but the actual stick, but there's a couple countries in Africa where people carve those out of wood to fit the precision movements of the car. Because, and this is actually a thing where people import them into first world countries because they're so highly, the quality of them is so high. But they can't afford to import a new $500 stick basically for metal. So they make one out of wood, and that guy makes a few dollars a day rather than $1 a day. Because India does import so much, and they also export so much, but they have so much manufacturing that is automated, that next level isn't really clear to a lot of people, and it's kind of a hard step to be okay, well, go find something else. And it's maybe they have some kind of hobby like woodworking, but you don't need 10 million farmers to become woodworkers all of a sudden. So like that natural progression has kind of been ripped away because of modern society,
Right.
and I think that's really the fundamental problem where a lot of people don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Because even in Africa, they don't have the money to buy those outside goods, but in India, the richer people do have the money to buy the outside goods, so they don't need that mid-level staff. So the economy
Yeah.
for that just doesn't exist in India.
Huh.
So because of the dichotomy in incomes and etc.
Yeah. So maybe the trick is to just get the basic income to a high enough level that people are better off not being farmers than farmers, rather than finding something for them to move into specifically.
Actually, I read an article 2 months ago about how they're having like how you so like that. Well, with the well, about how cloud research is and stuff like that. Will they
What
like
research?
cloud with the information cloud where
Oh, okay.
they're having pay people like $5 a day, which is a lot for the poor people in the slums and things, to like tag this is a car and this is a truck and this is a tree and whatever. And they just,
Okay.
That's not cloud though. That's outsourcing, and that's actually a very common industry thing in industry in the Philippines, for example, where they have like an IT industry where they take somebody $5 a day to sit at a computer and do that sort of thing.
Tagging things?
Yeah, no, there's literally
Like databases and tagging and
well,
data?
like pictures, like
Oh,
saying,
pictures, okay.
like, and
Yeah.
I've known people that that's something that they work on. Like I have a friend who's a researcher at MIT that they just outsource it and they pay 2 cents a picture,
Oh.
and somebody will say this is a that or this is that, and does this monkey look happy or sad? Is literally a thing, and they pay somebody 2 cents a picture to answer a yes or no question. And self-driving cars, I know that's a thing where it's they're building an AI infrastructure through uploading a series of images into the cloud and then having somebody in the Philippines download them and look at them and say yes or no or answer a similar question for each picture. It's actually really funny because they just started self-driving cars in Australia, and they didn't know what kangaroos were. Because they had never uploaded a picture of one to the database before, so that the AI couldn't tell what it was, and the cars would just seize up.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Because that's literally how they train AIs. They say, okay, here's 1,000,000 pictures of a kangaroo would be how you would train an AI to know it's a kangaroo.
Right.
Without ever having put one in the database before, it literally had no idea. The cars would just stop dead in the road anytime a kangaroo came anywhere in their field of vision.
Huh. That's funny.
No idea.
Yeah, so it's basically that. In order to train the AI, you need to feed it a bunch of pictures of things that are labeled.
Right.
So you have to hire people to label them.
Yeah.
But that's a
Interesting.
limited. I think maybe they could use some more people to do that. But the pay on that is already so low that if you hire more people, all you're going to do is downgrade the rate of pay to such a degree where it's not worth it anymore. It's people do the CAPTCHAs.
Yeah.
In third world countries also for bots, and you pay 1 cent per X number of captchas the person types in.
Oh, I see. You have a bot, and then you hire someone to fill out the captchas for the bot.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
It's just yes, they could do something like that, but the value of that is so low, and there are already so many people who do that to survive. All you would do is lower everyone's cost or standard of living. And if that's what the economy should be based on, then that's something. But
No, I mean, I think it makes sense that is not what you would want the economy to be based on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what should happen, but I do we agree that a thing that should not happen is that all the farmers should stop farming and then move to the giant cities, because those are where the only jobs are.
Well, I don't know. I think all the farmers that we don't need to have farming, I think it would make sense for them to stop farming. in terms of moving to the cities and competing for jobs, that might not be optimal, but it might be optimal for them to move to cities. It doesn't have to be the biggest, most prosperous cities, but
Tertiary cities.
tertiary cities, secondary cities, tertiary cities, where they can be closer to resources and infrastructure, and then it's cheaper to kind of access everything. Yeah.
Actually, NASA a few years ago measured the water table around cities, and it's actually like shrinking because they're using up so much water and they're going to run out.
I mean, you've seen that in South Africa, where they've actually like limited the water so heavily because they can't. Like many major cities, like in South Africa, have literally run out of water.
Is that because they like use underground aquifers that don't fill back up and that
Yeah,
kind
they
of
don't
thing?
fill back up quickly enough. They
Yeah.
don't have enough major other water sources, etc.
Yeah.
There's a thing that like in Texas in 10 or 15 years, they'll have hit the bottom of some of the aquifers in these agricultural areas, and they literally won't be able to farm anymore. Like, we will have deserts in Texas that are now farmland.
Interesting. Yeah. And you see sinkholes emerge and stuff in cities, partly due to this. I think the ancient city of Ur collapsed into a sinkhole. Yeah. So it's happening
Cities,
back
you
then.
never know the story is true.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
ancient. It's a long time ago.
Well, it's actually, I'm sorry, it's the lost city of Ur.
Even better.
Yeah.
It was lost. We don't know how. Legend has it a sinkhole, but
Yeah. No, they discovered a sinkhole, I think, and that's when they kind of discovered where the city used to be.
oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
that makes a little more sense.
Yeah.
But that's a good question. I mean, how would you deal with farmers that are kind of, not cast off, but they're in this completely different environment now, and what are they going to do? What are they going to work at? I mean, they're
Yeah,
not
and
going
how
to work
are they
at
going to spend their time?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's an interesting challenge. I mean, the first step obviously is give them money. So maybe
Right.
they're not farmers anymore, but at least they're still consumers and they're able to benefit from being able to buy things. But then the next challenge, which I think is an exciting challenge, is how do you help them have the most interesting, best life possible, right?
Right. It's harder to think about farmers in that situation than.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, for me. Yeah. It is.
I'm
Harder than-
ends like then who?
Easier to think of people who already have other interests or already might want to volunteer.
Farmers have other interests.
Like that's like how like 2-dimensional do you think farmers are? I've known many farmers who were 3-dimensional
Really?
people.
Yeah. Okay.
In
I
the
mean,
book, in the book Poor Economics, they mentioned that even the poorest people will
It's a
save
weird
up
bias.
for weddings
against
and
farmers.
festivals and ceremonies.
Yeah.
So they have that interest, and that interest is strong enough that they will save, their food money,
right.
shave
For-
off some from their food money, just
for-
so they'll have enough for the wedding and the ceremony and the dowry and the
Right.
holy days.
And they have like
Right.
5-day-long weddings in India. It's like a big thing, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, certainly, a poor rural farmer in India might still be a cricket fan or something like that. So there's opportunities to play sports, watch sports, play games. Maybe even if they have money, maybe internet access and
Right.
all kinds of possibilities for where to go.
What happened to the ranchers?
The ranchers.
The ranchers.
Which ones?
Yeah. Well, I don't know which ones, but we used to have cowboys and ranchers, and
You mean like the cowboys that get
yeah,
the
the
US?
cowboy type ranchers.
There's a lot of those in Russia right now, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, but what happened to them here in America when the economy changed and the country
They were
changed?
shipped over to Russia.
Are we
Well,
maybe
no,
allowed
so-
to be farmers? Because that seems dangerous.
Yeah, we still have ranchers. Like there are people
Yeah.
who do that still. It's
Yeah,
just
but I
a
don't think
smaller.
there's very many.
Well, no.
and
Well,
what
yes,
happened
the
to
proportion
that
of this
industry? What happened to those people? Is just
We've
my
industrialized cattle farming. Like I said, don't get me started on the cattle.
question. Oh yeah, the
industry.
beef. We're back
Yeah,
to the
no,
Right,
beef.
I just-
why are you bringing up cowboys? David warned us.
I don't really like. I will tell the story after this is done.
Okay.
But like, they still exist. Is a slightly smaller number of people in
Right.
the U.S. than it used to be. But here's the thing, like the actual industry has not shrunk that much. The proportion of that industry to the U.S. as a whole has shrunk dramatically.
So I guess the
Interesting.
question is,
Yeah.
what happened to the people who used to be ranchers who
Right.
were no longer needed
I mean, you
anymore?
talked about the
It's a
farmers
similar
having a
number.
middle
Like,
ground.
I
We
see.
had
to go
100,000 ranchers, and we still have 80,000 ranchers.
Okay, yeah.
Oh.
So maybe they just didn't train new ranchers as the
Right.
older ones retired, that kind of thing. Maybe
Right.
it wasn't a sudden
Right,
sudden
right. So
shift.
and they didn't move
Yeah.
to another kind of trade or
I mean,
job.
they
or-
a lot of them, so not to get too far down this, but I know way too much about ranchers, unfortunately. Like everything else in my life, I don't know how I know this information, but a lot of them have picked up horse training for rich people,
yeah,
and running stables for
Yeah.
wealthy people, and some of them have gone to Russia to train ranchers over there because,
Interesting.
or parts of Africa where the industry is growing, or
Right.
even parts of the Middle East where they have this semi, fertile land that you can herd cattle on, but isn't really of agricultural use.
Right.
So
So they did find
yeah,
other ways.
plains or steppes tend to do really well for them, and that part of the U.S. still exists, and there are still many cattle ranchers.
Mhm.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
Let's move on to something else.
Yeah, let's get away from the cattle.
Let me do ask,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understood what David was saying, that above farming there aren't the usual crafts and
The next step.
the historically typical ladder of progress up. But I think there are a few steps from bitter poverty to people who have a little money and can buy some of the necessities, providing the necessities like better construction or healthcare or teachers. The people can get jobs just in helping in their own recovery from poverty.
Well, yeah, I mean, there will be some things in there, but you don't healthcare is a highly regulated industry almost everywhere in the world, and somebody who's a farmer is not going to go become a doctor as a general rule. It's not going to be enough doctors to actually make a huge impact in the community. The percentage of people who are qualified to do that, the percentage of people who are qualified to go off and become a lot of these things wouldn't necessarily be enough. If you have a 50-year-old farmer, he's definitely not going to become, you know what I mean? It's just not going to happen. There are things they could do to increase the quality of the life of them and the people around them, and some people will find opportunities to do that, but it's not going to be one-to-one is the concern.
Right.
And even if you train doctors and things, there's going to be brain drain because people get paid so much more in the U.S. that
They won't accept Indian doctors.
Really?
As a general rule, no.
Oh.
You can't practice medicine as an Indian doctor. You can do research medicine and etc.
Mhm.
I believe you cannot practice. You can come to medical school here.
Right.
With a a bachelor's degree from India.
Right.
But if you don't go to medical school in the U.S. or a select number of countries, you cannot practice medicine on patients in the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And you'd have to go through medical school again, even though you already went through medical school.
I donate blood regularly, but there's a guy at the Red Cross who's Ugandan, and he actually has been applying to medical schools here. He's a doctor there, but he came here, and I think he just got accepted to one because he randomly disappeared last time I went. Very nice guy, but he's like, I'm a qualified doctor. I practiced medicine for years there, and I can't do that here. And he kind of felt at a loss.
Yeah. So I think as far as what can happen to the Indian farmers, there's a couple questions, and one is how do they get enough income, maximize their income, and then another question is how do they spend their time. So when we're saying what's the next step on the ladder, we kind of usually equate those two things. This is how the person's going to be spending their time and earning their money now. So if we can increase the amount of the basic income, that solves that part of the problem. And then the other part of the problem is the one that I think is really interesting, what interesting ways can they spend their time? And maybe they'll spend their time doing things that are useful for their community that maybe don't pay very much, but maybe pay a little bit. Everyone has money to spend, so they can maybe spend it on each other, paying each other to do things. Maybe a lot of them are just that money's leaving and they're buying things from outside, and some of that's okay too. But yeah, I mean, I feel like this is one of the exciting challenges that that basic income, provides for us. That we have this opportunity to really to find out what people can make of themselves and help facilitate that and foster people's growth. I don't think of it as a scary problem. I think of it as an exciting challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The real thing we would ideally see, like having removed that middle level of manufacturing or consumer generated things, is like services. That tends to be like how most people view that as a positive thing. Like, okay, so you're not going to be a farmer anymore. You have some amount of income. You don't need to worry too much, but you have 3 kids and you need to occupy them and you want time, so you hire somebody to be in, like, communally you hire somebody to be coaching soccer games.
Right.
So the kids can go play soccer for a few hours and you can have them out of the house. And then that person hires somebody to clean their house while they're coaching soccer because they just don't have time to clean anymore. Yeah. So you'll have a circular service economy.
Right.
Yeah.
And like there's not really any consumption there and there's not really any, et cetera, but like you're actually producing something of value to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is important. Yeah.
Yeah, there's consumption of the services, but not, you're not using up physical resources or something like that. And, it doesn't have to be entirely circular, it just needs to have that circular component, because if people are getting the basic income on one end and then money's leaving on the other end, that can still flow within the economy, within the local community in between that time. Yeah. Yeah. You guys ready for another quote?
Yep.
I don't know if we're gonna get through them all, Alex.
Yeah.
Not worried about it. The core idea of providing a basic minimum income was raised by India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. I should probably be able to pronounce that because he's pretty famous. In 1938, even before Indian independence in 1947. But historically, the success of government anti-poverty programs in India has been mixed. Although there has been improvement in some areas, implementation has been afflicted by corruption, leakage, and the exclusion of many of the deserving poor. So this kind of speaks to what you were talking about, Steve, with the corruption and something like a basic income, maybe minimizing the potential exposure and influence of corruption on a program. Yeah. Another question here is. They're framing it as an anti-poverty program, or they're talking about anti-poverty programs in general, and then in the context of the article, they're framing basic income as an anti-poverty program.
Actually, I said a few weeks ago about the job guarantee, about how they're guaranteed 180 days a year, but if they can't find 180 days, typically only can find 100 days, if that. They actually give them a basic income sort of thing to make up for the lack of days.
So they still get paid for the full 180 days, basically. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's interesting, and I guess that's kind of like a basic income. With a kind of a requirement attached to it, where you only have to do as much as is needed. But yeah, I mean, back to the question of anti-poverty programs. Do we think framing universal basic income as an anti-poverty program is the most useful framing for it?
No. Because people look down on those people, and
if everybody's getting it though, there's nobody to look down on. Like, I understand that some people might attach stigma to it, but like, if literally everyone is getting it, it's not like, Section 8 housing or something like that, where people go like, oh, like, blah, blah, blah. No, everybody's just being a given amount of money, and who cares where your money's coming from? Like,
So if it goes to all rural farmers, is that close enough to everyone, would you say?
I actually don't think it is close enough to everyone.
Yeah.
I think that even if you have to, like, I really strongly believe that you have to give it to everyone, even billionaires, even if you end up taxing most of it off of them. Or they donate it to charity or whatever. Like, I don't think Bill Gates would keep it if you gave him an extra $1,000 a month. because Bill Gates already gives away most of his money.
Right.
But like on paper, you should still give it to Bill Gates and give him his choice, because that would reduce the social stigma that could be attached to it by some people.
Right. So back to the question, how do we feel about the framing of basic income as an anti-poverty program?
I mean, it does reduce poverty. It would.
Sure. But when we talk about the economy as a whole, obviously the economy as a whole reduces poverty when it's functioning correctly. We don't really think of the economy as an anti-poverty program, right? We think of it as more of a prosperity engine, or just how things work, right?
I think it's like, it's just one of those things where like I personally don't view it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard for me. Like, Medicaid was started as an anti-poverty program, and
Right.
it was advertised as such, and guns and butter, and I just feel like, yeah, like this would, and it did reduce poverty like very significantly, and like I feel like some people might argue about whether adults should have it or not, and I'm not going to touch that, but like anybody who says that you shouldn't provide that to kids is kind of an asshole, like, quite frankly. Like,
Okay.
And like having it be anti-poverty is secondary to the fact that like you should provide some basic level of things for your people.
Is it really just semantics? I mean, I don't think it matters.
Yeah, it just feels
It is semantics, but sometimes the semantics matter.
Yeah.
So we can imagine an economy that's humming along, and then we do something really stupid with our economic policy, that causes massive
More
inflation
poverty.
or something like that, and then the inflation leads to
Yeah.
a lot of poverty.
Yeah.
If we fix inflation using monetary policy, do we call that an anti-poverty program, right? Even though it addresses the problem and addresses the poverty associated with it.
I mean, the New Deal was addressed as an anti-poverty program.
Right.
Sure.
I don't know if it's so bad that it's called that. I mean, a lot of people who, like Bill Gates, don't need the money, think of it that way, then they're more likely to give back that money if they know they're not poor. And the anti-poverty aspect of it is highlighted, which isn't a bad thing. I mean,
Do we care whether Bill Gates is giving back the money? we give
no,
him?
but
Okay.
it's the way it's worded. I mean, the fact that it's anti-poverty,
Yeah.
I think, is a good effect, as well as, I know that it doesn't seem accurate to you, but it's also
It's not that it's not accurate, it's that I would say it's too narrow of a description of what it is.
Right.
That it's helping the economy function properly,
Right.
and that a properly functioning economy has less poverty in it.
Right. I don't know. I think people would be more likely to feel positive about an anti-poverty program than a universal basic income, because then they would be thinking about, oh, well, this is going to be helping people out of poverty, and I'm also going to be helped. But universal basic income, in a way, feels like, well, some people shouldn't be getting that. People get worried about income inequality with that, when really the anti-poverty aspect of it is huge. I mean, the homeless problem is huge. And I think people are, kind of confused about that and not able to do anything about it, but they would like to. So I think there's some good in that phrase, an anti-poverty program. Might not be
Yeah.
the way that you see it working in the background, but just as a perception, I don't think it's bad.
So is your concern that calling it the anti-poverty program, like, it keeps us still not thinking about what an economy is actually for? I'm curious, like, can you say a little bit more about what exactly?
Yeah.
Like, I understand
So I-
that it's, like, too narrow.
So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is certainly the idea of, people have the stigma of the poor, like it's somehow their fault that it's poor. So if we're talking about an anti-poverty program, then maybe
You
it
just refer
feels.
to poor people as it.
What's that?
You just referred to poor people as it, and I just wanted to point that out.
I meant as poor, or what did I say? What?
You misspoke.
I misspoke.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just like, wow, talking about attaching stigma to the poor. Like,
Poor. Yeah. People think of poor people as, what did I say? Poor people as it being their fault that
Yeah.
that they're poor.
The it's poor
Yeah.
is what you said.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just.
their fault.
Yeah.
Their fault that they're poor. Yeah,
Right.
I might have
Yeah,
said
yeah.
it's poor because I almost just said it again.
So
Yeah.
then the anti-poverty
So
feels
so then anti-poverty feels like you're helping people who weren't able to help themselves or something
Yeah.
like that. So that's part of it.
right.
But I think a bigger part of it is when you talk about it, it's not just the anti-poverty part, but it's the program part. So it sounds like something that you're putting on top of what's normal in order to address a specific problem, instead of maybe something that is fixing something that was previously broken in the economy. Like the fact that people did not have incomes to maximize their benefit from the economy, that was a defect in the economy, and we're correcting that by giving that back, by putting that
Yeah.
back in. So I think does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's,
Um,
it's more neutral, much more neutral term.
Yeah.
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 I guess it's because I personally don't attach the stigma that like I just
A lot of people
I
do. though.
am
Yeah.
Yeah.
like I have no problem calling it anti-poverty measure personally because I actually think that's what it really like. I know that's not the intent of it, but like that is the fundamental impact of it. Like it would significantly
Well,
reduce
that's the
poverty
intent of
rate.
it for most people who talk about it. It's just
Yeah.
not my intent.
Yeah, no,
Right.
and I get that. I'm
Yeah.
just saying like
Yeah, I mean, it would have that effect, and I think that's a really important part of it. Okay, good answer. Good answers, everybody. Anyone have anything else before I move on to the next tab?
I don't like that deserving poor part.
Yeah. So what
the
they mean?
deserving poor, as opposed to
they
the
probably set
undeserving
a,
poor.
Well, they probably set a floor of like you can't make more than so much, so you deserve the UBI.
okay. It's
And,
doesn't.
and
Yeah.
they so
Yeah.
the exclusion of many of the deserving poor doesn't mean that they deserve things because they're poor. It means that of the people who, like it says
Yeah,
in the
they're
next sentence there,
qualified.
for example, the major
Yeah,
not reach
yeah,
40,
yeah, yeah.
65% of the
Right.
poorest.
Yeah.
They literally just were missing people.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
some of the people who
Deserving
needed it.
of the money, not deserving.
They met the qualifications for the money.
Right.
Right.
okay.
People who needed it were not
Right.
getting it.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Well, the phrase "deserving poor" suggests another framing
Yep.
that well, there's the deserving and the undeserving. In the case of Indian farmers, they're thought to be deserving because they're not lazy.
Right.
Maybe they're lazy, but generally they're
Not viewed as such
Right.
to do their job
by
and
the
to be
politicians who they elect.
Right.
And in America, it matters because like coal miners who are out of work are considered the deserving poor
Yeah.
because they obviously weren't lazy
Right.
when there was work to do. They mined the coal when there was work to do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Legally
It does have
American.
connotations, negative connotations
Right.
to
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Well, positive because they do deserve it.
Oh, well.
I
the
was
thing is, there's-
Somebody may
particularly
say
in
this-
America, it's a problem of people talking about the undeserving, poor,
Right.
the
Yeah.
actually lazy,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
actual freeloaders.
what you actually see
political problem.
among a lot of poor
Yeah.
people is like a strong will for them to get like the government to step in and benefit them to some degree, but for the government not to stand in and benefit the people who are other. So like
Yeah.
they want their constituency helped at the expense of, but they don't want the other constituencies helped. It's actually something that politicians of both parties and of varying stripes, among the spectrums, have played up and against each other. It's like they play against the other, and
Right.
it's just kind of
It's a political obstacle for
Yeah.
UBI,
It
at
is.
least in America.
Among others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might deserve this because I worked really hard my
Right,
whole life,
right.
and it's not my fault that the factory left town when I was
Right.
53 and I couldn't really do anything else. But
Right.
that town over there that I never really liked their football team, like the fact that their factory left was their own fault, and they, those people are just lazy.
That's
Yeah.
the obstacle.
Yep.
And similarly, like in India and in America, if you are thought to be poor because of automation, whether it's tractors or robots, or if you're thought to be poor just because of an economic transition, like coal to better energy, then you are again the deserving poor, and you are entitled to some insurance after your
Right.
good faith service, whether it's Coal Miners America or Farmers in India.
Well,
Because
I
there's
get-
this idea that people deserve to receive a benefit based on their status as a worker rather than based on their status
Yeah,
as
it's
a
all
human.
part of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that goes to, well, do you deserve to get free money if you drink? Do you deserve to get free money if you're going to spend it on potato chips? That whole welfare cheats thing that was happening in the
Yeah.
60s. People being
Yeah.
angry behind people who were buying things that weren't,
So-
really fundamental foods.
So this is I guess maybe another part of why I don't like framing it as an anti-poverty program, because it's really, in order for the economy to work, consumers need spending money, right? And that's the problem that basic income solves. And if somehow people are behaving in a way that's harming themselves or spending money in a way that's harming themselves, we can intervene and help those people or figure out things, to do there. But it doesn't change the fact that the fundamental problem of getting spending money into the hands of consumers is really something that needs to be solved as well. So you solve that, and then you kind of see what's going on. And the idea, it's tied to the idea that you deserve it if you work, and you can do
Yes,
what you want with your
right.
money if you worked for it and if you earned it. But if we're just helping you,
Right.
then maybe not.
Right.
So even when you hear about these studies of basic income, people are looking at like whether they drink or not, and
Yeah.
and
Yep.
whether they're becoming more lazy or not,
Right.
and that kind of thing. And that's partly because we're thinking of it as an anti-poverty program. We're thinking of it, these people did not succeed the way they were supposed to, and we're trying to help them get back into the economy. Instead, if we think about it as fundamental economic infrastructure, then there's no longer a question of, well, how are people spending their money?
Right.
It's a question of, well, how do we get the economy working for everyone's benefit as much as possible? And if there are some
Right.
people who are, it's not about who deserved what and who worked, a certain amount. People get money because they're people, and the economy is for the people.
Right.
And then if someone's harming themselves, then you can
That's
figure out how to
another-
help that person,
right,
right?
Yeah.
So
So it
it-
removes the judgment. You see it as kind
Yeah.
of a judgmental
Yeah.
phrase.
And it's interesting because it's really like people really glom onto that. Like they attach themselves to this question of like, are people spending their money
I
appropriately? Are
know.
they
It's
doing
been
the right
true
thing with
from
their
the
money?
beginning of
Yeah.
these meetings, right?
Yeah.
People concerned about that.
Yeah.
Right
So
from the beginning. Video games. Are they going to play video games?
yeah. So do you think if we framed it less as an anti-poverty program, there would be less of that concern, or is it just?
Well, that has a flip side, which I was
Yeah.
saying before. The flip side is positive in that people would feel that they were doing something socially, conscious and good by
By supporting it?
supporting it because it's anti-poverty. As long as they think that their money, or not their money, but that money is going toward bringing people, out of suffering. But again, that implies that somebody's going to make decisions about who's poor, who's suffering, who's this, who's that. And
Right.
so, yeah, I can see that that's a problem, that framing, the anti-poverty framing.
Yeah.
I think the dichotomy you see is really like some people really like it as an anti-poverty measure
Yeah.
who may not support it or understand it any other way also.
Yeah, right.
Right.
That's very true.
Because even again, not to get overly political, but like the members of the Republican Party who have come out in support of it generally have supported it as an anti-poverty measure, but to replace other things.
Yes.
So they say
Right.
basically we will fix it in the tax code.
Yeah.
We will give everybody $1,000 a year. If you make a certain amount of money, we'll just tax it away from you.
$1,000 a month?
Or $1,000 a month, yeah, sorry. But we will just tax it away from you if you make too much money, but we'll use it to replace Section 8 housing
Right.
and food stamps and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then we'll just simplify everything
Mm-hmm.
and not have to worry about that stuff. Like, some people have come out to support it under that kind of condition.
Streamlining
Yeah.
the bureaucracy and
And
stuff.
so they view it as anti-poverty, but like that's the reason they support it.
Okay. Well, I think it's still possible to be compatible with that framing, even if you're thinking of it as economic infrastructure. Because if you have an economy that's functioning properly when people have money to spend, and then you take that away, so some people don't have money to spend. Then you come up with all these other kinds of band-aids, like Section 8 housing and food stamps and these kinds of things, which are kind of compensating for the fact that the economy is not working the way that it's supposed to. So I fully believe that once a basic income is implemented, and once you get it up to the highest kind of sustainable level, we might look at some of these other programs, and it might just be that they're not really benefiting people very much anymore because they're not needed anymore because we fixed the underlying problem. So I think people on the right love to talk about market efficiency and stuff like that, and you can frame basic income in those terms, right? So they're still talking about efficiency, but they're talking about efficiency of anti-poverty programs, and you don't want to give more than you have to, and like that kind of thing. But
the libertarian angle that a person knows best what they need, just give them money. Make the government as small as possible while also having the people get along. And in the beginning, I understand your idea that the great engine of the modern economy is obviously not working as well as it could be.
Right.
But that's a technical problem, and UBI is a technical solution to this technical problem.
Yeah.
And it's not a big moral.
Right. But we will attach all those moral equivalencies to it.
It doesn't have to be.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Back to India.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love talking about this stuff.
That's why you host a thing every week about it.
That's why I host a thing every week. What was I? Oh, here it is. Okay, so this is just the next part. For example, the major employment guarantee scheme in 2011-2012 did not reach 40 to 65% of the poorest. Providing universal income is an appealing alternative because it obviates the need for identifying and targeting the correct beneficiaries.
What's the major employment guarantee scheme in 2011-2012?
So is this what you were talking about, Richard?
Yeah.
Oh, the 180 days thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is that people are supposed to be guaranteed a job, but you can't find all the people who are supposed to be guaranteed a job. So, 40 to 65%. I mean, it didn't work for half the people who needed it didn't get it, right? So
Interesting.
So yeah, I mean, if you have a universal payout, and you feel like some people don't deserve it, then it's on the government to figure that out through the taxes, and that makes it a lot simpler. It's no longer people having to apply for the benefits or finding the people to get the benefits. Everyone just gets the benefit, and now if the government wants to modify that, it's on them to figure out the complexity. And the people who need to pay taxes are the ones who have more resources to figure out how to navigate loopholes and stuff like that, or just navigate the complexities of the tax system. Yeah, it's good to have that on the taxation side if you want to have taxes.
Are you?
I think a properly implemented basic income has no tax associated with it. Yeah, because it's a matter of how much spending the economy can sustain, and taking money away from rich people isn't going to change how much stuff can be bought by rural farmers with money, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The next one. Okay, so this is about the biometric identification stuff. So there's still some way to go because biometric identification remains contentious and financial inclusion suffers from the last mile problem. Beneficiaries are still physically distant from banks or ATMs, but India is catching up. So this is what we talked about before. Like everyone's getting their basic income in there, or everyone could get their basic income into their account, but that doesn't mean it's easy for them to access the account and actually withdraw the money and or spend the money, that kind of thing.
There's I pulled up earlier because I was like, I remember an article about like the biometric system being like messed up, and I don't know how much they've improved it or how the government would run it, but there was an NPR article from last fall talking about at like this ration shop, like this guy like scans people's fingerprints, but like the machine like runs on batteries and needs like a cell phone signal, and so he's like trying to like get the cell phone signal in this rural area, and and like you can have like more advanced ones that do like iris screens and stuff, but a lot of the rudimentary ones are like fingerprint ones. So if you have people doing a lot of manual labor, like their fingerprints are not as clear, and so if, like the story is like, yeah, so here's like this guy who like, you know, gets turned away from like getting rations because the machine can't read his fingerprints, and so it can't verify that he like is the person who like is entitled to, you know, Oliver's, you know, section of rice.
Yeah, I mean that can be solved in other ways though. Like I'm sure like people could be probably have a unique identifying name, like code, like a social security number, effectively tied to them, and like you could have like a pin tied to that, like with the card, where the card can be read, and then if you know that thing, like, you know, that way then maybe the individual person, the actual person doesn't have to be present if they can't be also.
Yeah.
Like there's other ways around that don't have to do with like the fact that the fingerprint can't be read.
Yeah, I just wanted to like I'm sure there are ways to solve it. I just wanted to put it that there are like complications. When they talk about like data privacy, like that you can that like, you know, like a journalist was able to like buy access to like 1 billion people's data.
Oh yeah, no, I think I heard you say that.
Yeah.
Well, and also, what about internet infrastructure in rural areas? I mean, just the simple fact of being able to access. You have a cell phone, maybe, but smartphone. What if you can't get online?
So you'd use your biometric information maybe when you're at the ATM and you want to withdraw the money, but then when you have the money, you're just spending the money.
Right, but
Well,
those
in India-
ATMs can be physically distant. I'm just thinking
Right,
about
yeah.
if you want to transfer money online, like from PayPal and buy something through Amazon, is what, you know, people do here a lot. That's
Right.
not going to be happening.
Like a year ago, with money, India actually got rid of like
The equivalent of a $10 and $20 bill.
mhm.
They actually removed
Right,
it from
yeah.
the economy overnight.
Yeah, I remember that
Huh.
because they didn't want to have
Huh.
people hoarding large bills.
Oh.
You know, a lot of times that's used for organized crime and stuff like
Oh,
Yeah, tax avoidance and organized crime tends to be the problem. So I think that they specifically removed the equivalent of a $10, like a bill would trend. I actually looked up how much 6,000 rupees was, and it's about $80. So I would assume that it was like the 1,000 and 1,500 rupee note or something.
Yeah.
But those were like the two highest value ones that were in common circulation, and they just removed them. And apparently they had done something similar, like with even higher interval bills, like many, you know, decades ago.
Yeah.
Where they just removed them from circulation overnight, and like they were worth nothing all of a sudden.
Yeah. But they announced they're doing it ahead of time, so people would come in and
No. I mean, this time, yes. Last time, no. But this time they did, and then you weren't allowed to change more than $60 per day per person into the new currency,
Oh,
and
that's
you only had a
interesting.
month to do it. So, like, if you had hoarded all this cash, you would only, like, however much money you had, you could only turn it into a few $1,000s.
So there must have been a lot of like money laundering, like people saying like, oh, you can, you know, like.
Oh yeah, people
Yeah.
people were lining up farmers and letting them keep like $5 per. Like the mob was lining up farmers and putting them in front of a bank and saying, you know, here's your
Yeah.
$60 per person. You know, you can keep 5 of it, and like when you're getting paid $1 a day, that's a great deal. And you know, or a couple dollars of it, and like just bring you back the new bills. And like the person would literally hand out money to people in line on one side, and when they came out of the bank, take it from them on the other side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was insane.
Yeah. I think they retired the highest denomination euro note recently as well. Maybe the 500 euro note.
Yes,
Yeah.
they did that a few years ago, but
Yeah.
that was well in advance. They announced it,
Right.
and it was, I think, you had a couple of years to bring it to a bank, and they didn't like you couldn't get a new 500 euro note. It was, this is for being removed from circulation. You can deposit it or exchange it.
Right.
Because that was too easy to move too much money too quickly.
Right. Yeah. So back to the biometrics. I mean, I think David, you're basically right that there's ways around a lot of the stuff. Like you don't need your biometrics even necessarily to withdraw the money from the ATM. You could just have an ATM card or something like that, but you might need to use your fingerprint or something to be able to sign up for the income in the first place or something like that to make sure that you're like a unique person, that kind of thing. And
I mean, they could even do that with like an iris, like at a government
Sure.
agency. I'm sure
Sure.
they could arrange like for this one place to have it be
Right.
DNA based or iris
Sure,
based or something.
sure. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be that you just use your biometrics every time you spend money or every time you withdraw money. It can just be in order to sign up for the program, in order to register for the program, that kind of thing. And then if you need to if your account gets compromised or something like that, so,
Every 5 years or something.
yeah, renew it or something. Yeah. So I think the idea of farmers not being able to use their fingerprints. I mean, I think that's problematic, and it sounds like they are having problems with that. So that's a real thing. But hopefully they can get around that by not having them have to use it as much. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, with regard to technology, somebody was telling me that actual smartphones can be much, much cheaper than what we in America consider a smartphone.
Right.
There's like a whole layer of unnecessary luxury on top of our smartphones.
Yeah, you could get a
Yeah.
functional phone that sends payments
Mhm.
and can do financial stuff for $10 or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So that's certainly a huge deal if you're giving everyone a basic income of $1 a day. Maybe they don't have the phone at the beginning, and it's inconvenient for them to access the ATMs, that kind of stuff. But then they can save up and get one of these phones, and then it becomes convenient. So this is kind of maybe a problem that solves itself a little bit as people have more money. They can kind of bootstrap themselves using that money. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, those phones are already common in, again, Africa, where
Right.
people make, the equivalent amount of money, and everybody has one. Maybe not everybody, but and yeah, a few dollars for a basic phone, not a smartphone necessarily, but a basic phone,
Yeah.
and then maybe $10 or $20 for a super basic smartphone at this point.
Yep. Good. Next quote. The first step taken by the southern state of Telangana was to start providing cash transfers to landowning farmers. The state of they're talking about states in India that are moving closer to something like a basic income. So the state of Odisha in eastern India followed by extending the scheme to agricultural laborers and tenants. Last week, the Congress Party announced that providing a minimum income guarantee for the poor would be a key part of its manifesto for the parliamentary elections in May. So this article is from February 7th. So it's a few months ago. So now those elections are actually happening as we speak. So last week, Congress Party announced that providing a minimum income guarantee for the poor would be a key part of its manifesto for the parliamentary elections in May. The central government budget presented this week proposed a cash transfer of 6,000 rupees per year for all small and marginal farmers up to a landowning limit of 2 hectares. So do we know how much money 6,000 rupees is?
I looked that up, $80.
So that's $80 a year.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's less than $1 a day, but still perhaps substantial to someone who's making $1 a day.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it'd be.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think this kind of speaks to, I think it was Richard's point about the states being competitive with each other and kind of copying each other when they're successful. So maybe this kind of thing can spread and grow in India.
And 80 rupees, $80 a day is like a quarter a day.
$80 a year.
$80 a year is like a quarter a day. So
Yeah, that's a 25% quality of life increase for these people.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're getting to the end here. Let's go around and get final thoughts.
We didn't talk about the caste system very much. Somebody brought that up in the beginning. I was interested in talking more about whether or not you thought that would be changed as a result. Because we've talked in here about, the elimination possibly of the stigma of poverty or even crime and people coming out of prison and all of that stuff that you think is associated with, a lot of it is associated with income level. And I'm not sure how that would relate to, in India, the caste system. That's really culture. It's a cultural thing. I mean, ancient, and how would it be affected by if they do have UBI? I wonder how that would change. I think you said something about
Last
it. Was it last week? Yeah, that it could change.
Yeah. So let me speak to that for a second. I don't think a basic income will automatically change, some of these cultural things, but it's certainly something that's independent of these cultural biases, right? So if there's some kind of discrimination based on caste or religion or race or
Right,
anything like
right.
that,
That's not
if
about,
you're getting your income in a way that's independent from those systems that are biased against you, then that allows you to live your life in a way that's more free from those systems that are kind of discriminating against you. So it doesn't fix those systems on its own per se, but it gives you more freedom from those systems. And
Yeah,
especially
that's
the
a good
higher
point.
the basic income is, the more it is.
freedom
So
from- yeah.
I mean, there's other secondary effects like, as everyone becomes richer, maybe people will start to think of each other more as equals, that kind of thing. That might break down some of the traditional caste, judgments and stuff like that. But I think,
because those caste systems also
Right.
are income related. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely.
but the immediate effect is that you're less dependent on these systems that are going to discriminate against you. Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I again, like the whole social stigma thing comes up to some degree, and it kind of goes back to my point that I phrased many times with air. It's come up, and I've very struck my concern about it is the only giving it to the farmers. Like there are billionaires in India who that $80 a day isn't going to mean anything to them, but by giving it to them, you are reducing the stigma. You're not hurting the economy in any way. Like that,
Right.
that $80 is not going to make they'll never spend that $80. What difference does it make? And you can handle that on the taxation side if you so choose, and you don't decide to eliminate taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole thing is all of these experiments and everything everybody always pushes with this is, but let's help the poor people, and I think that's what adds stigma to it, and it just drives me nuts. Quite frankly, that's kind of my final thought is you cannot apply it only to a specific group and have it actually be universal basic income.
Right.
You can handle it some other way if you don't think Bill Gates needs that $12,000 if you talk about a number in the US.
Do you think something like this could be a stepping stone toward something more like a universal basic income?
I actually think that it wouldn't be.
Okay.
I think that what would happen is when you start giving it to a limited group of people like that, people are going to have that association, and it could very harshly critique people's or change people's perception of it going forward.
Okay.
And
like within India, with the citizens' dividend or whatever they call it.
In Italy?
Italy, yes.
Yeah.
it just I think it would be a detriment to the cause and not a progression towards it.
Okay. Elizabeth.
My great conversation, folks. I'd be interested to know more about sort of how they, what the infrastructure actually is. I totally take David's point about this is a soluble problem, but I remain sort of curious about how exactly that problem is going to be solved, both from a distribution, how are you going to actually get this to people, and then a utilization, how are people going to be able to actually spend this money, especially since it's the people most impacted are the people that are institutionally going to have the most struggle with both of those ends of it. So I'd be curious to understand better how they're, because it feels like the thing, if you roll it out and that doesn't work, there's possibly some real societal damage that happens there.
Yeah. Okay. Richard.
Well, I actually remember this, watching The Sopranos, where how they, these Muslim terrorist group, they scammed the credit cards of these people. Well, and then I also remembered a few years ago I heard about the RFID chips, where these researchers, they automatically increase the amount to the like
Oh, sorry.
like bus tickets, bus cards or whatever to the maximum amount by using this machine that sent out a signal to the cards.
Okay.
Well, they could just do that, or like debit the cards.
So the question, or so the concern you're bringing up about India in particular is just how to make sure that the system is secure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
People could just like lose all their money and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. You have to like manage fraud and hacking and stuff like that. Okay. Steve.
You're living places that are living on $1 a day actually have to worry about things like infant mortality and preventable diseases and like that.
Yeah.
So for them, for such places to just have their circumstances improve a little bit, so that, for instance, infant mortality is not such a problem, at a certain point, the families say, oh, we don't have to have so many children because the chances of our children surviving are that much better.
Yep.
And so things will improve for that reason also. So it's sort of a virtuous cycle in that way. And to get this double improvement, the people just have to basically live.
Yeah.
They don't have to produce and export. If they just live better, then they'll get this much better.
Yeah.
We actually covered that a few months ago.
We talk about a lot of stuff. I mean, I think that's great. And so Mitchell has a comment. He says it just seems like past in Finland and India that it is only to select groups and not universal yet. There's qualifications to get it. So I mean, I think that's right, and I think that's a problem. And I think to kind of David's point about needing to be universal to avoid kind of these cutoffs and the stigma and dividing groups of people, I think that's really important. And I think I've said this before, but I think one of the things that's preventing these types of programs from being universal is the idea that there's this fiscal constraint and you have a certain amount of money and you want to allocate it in the right way. Whereas kind of what David said was that, you give money to Bill Gates, that doesn't affect the economy. You give money to the rich Indian, that doesn't affect the economy. So it actually doesn't affect how much money you can give to the poor people. But as long as the governments are trying to kind of actually balance their fiscal budget, that makes something like a basic income feel like it's more expensive or less achievable or less optimal. I'm curious to see what happens in India. I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic that something like this can be more of a stepping stone towards basic income, but I acknowledge that that the concerns David had are true as well. That like if people get used to it being this thing that only goes to some people, they might get stuck in that mindset. So that's it. It was a great conversation, you guys. Next week we're talking about minimum wage. So we'll. I think that'll be a really good conversation. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Alex.
Didn't we already do the minimum wage?
We did not. We did the labor market. We'll figure out how to shut this down. There we go.